My guest tonight is from Canada, our neighbors to the north. She is a photojournalist and co-founder of Metal Titans, an entertainment website dedicated to everything metal. Please welcome to the Eclectic Arts virtual studio, Char Tupper. Char.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Like we were talking pre-show, just kind of hanging in there day to day, and
Right?
kind of missing some things and looking for silver linings in others. And
Can say that again.
Yeah, and as we were talking pre-show, for those out there that are watching this, that we've shared a few photo pits over the past couple of years when it comes to concerts, pre-pandemic, obviously. And so we're going to be talking to Char about her background in photography and also in metal in general, and maybe a little bit about life up in Canada. And but let's kind of just go right into it. This is what I've been asking everybody, I think, on every interview I've done for the most part, is like, how have you been handling this whole time from, February, March in terms of the pandemic to now?
Financially, I'm perfectly fine. I have a regular full-time job outside of doing photography. So sadly, it doesn't quite pay all that great all the time. It's a little hard sometimes. So I've worked full-time since I've ever started doing photography. So financially speaking, fine. I haven't even had to go on EI or anything. I've worked 40 hours a week since the beginning of the pandemic. Photography speaking, I miss it every single day of every single second of every single minute. I miss being in that photo pit. I miss being with my friends in the same industry as me. And you know what? I miss the friends I've made around the world. I miss seeing all my friends that, especially right near the beginning, I would have seen my friends in Flesh God and Wolfheart and a whole bunch of them right when the pandemic first hit. And that was really, really hard. And it was like, at first it was like, maybe it's going to be okay in a few months. And we're now at October and still no sign of it. So I miss them every day, but I'm coping. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, yeah, it sounds like you have, the necessities are still in place for you, which is always, obviously important. Those other things like, missing your band friends and, just industry friends. I completely understand that because I'm in the same boat. But here we get to connect virtually. And so that's always a plus. And just off the top of my head, when you're mentioning, and I know this from seeing your work, that you do have quite a few band friends that you've made over the years. Can you think back to what was maybe one of the first bands that you kind of got to know pretty well and have continued to be friends with?
A lot of people that know me on a very, very personal level is Behemoth.
Okay.
As I wear their merch, I don't know if you can really see, but Nurgle from Behemoth is actually the very first person who gave me a photo pass into a larger size gig. We knew each other since 2007. We met before I even did photography full time. And I decided a couple years in of our friendship that I wanted to do this all the time. And I was used to shooting just regular local gigs. And of April 2008, when Behemoth toured with Dimmu Borgir, he said, you know what? You deserve a chance at shooting the big guys like us. Here's a photo pass. Come on into the pit and take our photos. And I was like, I was glowing. It was such a surreal experience. And it really did get my foot in the door, because then that year I ended up meeting Charles Elliott from Nuclear Blast and a whole whack of people from different record labels. And it just, boom, took off from there. So I really owe a lot to Nurgle from Behemoth. So he's my first connection, and we're still good friends till today. Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, it sounds like you were obviously a fan of the band, and then he got to know you, and then it's like, hey, so you're doing this photography thing. Well, yeah, why don't you come shoot us? And then that opened up other doors and avenues, and that's awesome. They're one of the bands. I don't know if I should be saying this to you, but they're one of the bands I have not covered one of their shows.
Oh, really? Well,
yeah. I remember there's two different occasions I was supposed to, and I can't remember what happened, if it was like a work thing or something else interfered, but I had to back out of it. So I was I was on the list to do things, and then they had to yank my name off of it because I couldn't honor the commitment, which sucked.
Oh, that's too bad. They've really grown over the last, I'd say 5 years easily, live performance wise. Because when I first started shooting them, they barely, like, they still traveled in a van. Now they have headlining shows at like pretty decent theaters now. So they've got fire now, and they've got all kinds of stage props and everything. And they're pretty much almost their entire Europe show comes to North America now. So they've really grown since I saw them first time in 2006. So they've really grown, and it's really worth it. I've seen the band now from then to now is 22 times, but I've photographed them 15 times. So it's worth it every time.
Wow. So 22 times you've seen them, 15 times you've covered them.
Sure have. They probably don't even know that.
I can't wait till I get to that point with any artist. I'm not I'm not to that point with anybody, but that's awesome for you, which kind of brings us to a good point is so when did you first get into metal? When did this whole like obsession start?
That's a good question. I've never actually really sat down and thought about it. When I was in high school, probably my last year, so I would have been 17 years old. So I've been into metal for a good chunk of time. My brother was really into metal all through high school, and I just remember him playing Devil Driver. He was really into Devil Driver, at least in the early 2000s, of course. So that's where I was kind of like, okay. And I was into like hip hop and stuff at the time because my friends were. So I just remember getting so annoyed at his music all the time, going, God, I can't understand what they're saying. I can't understand what they're saying. And one day it all of a sudden just clicked, and I'm like, I can understand what they're saying. That's really good. And all of a sudden it just went boom. I liked metal overnight. And it was just, and ever since I haven't stopped loving it.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I think of some of the other media members that I've gotten a chance to meet in the last, 3 or 4 years, when I think of metal people, I think of you for sure. And that's awesome because I grew up with metal. It's my foundation as well. And that'll never change. I've obviously branched off into other things as well. But when you go down to the core, it's still this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally, for sure. It's funny because when I don't like hip hop and stuff nearly as much anymore. There's some I respect because I remember it from when I was a kid growing up. But it's just like being in Metal Titans, it's actually branched my taste. I used to really just be like black and death metal. That's all there is. That's all I branched to. And now that I've been doing the website for 10 years now, it's really branched me to start liking things like AC/DC and like just go back to the roots that my parents grew up with, which was AC/DC, Queen, Led Zeppelin. And I've grown to appreciate them and now realize too that they influence the bands I love as well. So it's like, funny how that happens over time. But as I get older, I guess, maybe, I don't know, but
no, that makes sense. I think if you become a fan of any band or even like a genre, then you start digging into the roots. Like, so what came before this? How did this develop? And then you start discovering these other things. I know even for me, like listening to a band like Kiss, and that brings me back to the Stones, the Beatles, Zeppelin, Purple, because that's who influenced them. And then you go back to those artists and like who influenced them. You might be looking at gospel or country or rhythm and blues and all that kind of thing. And it just keeps, snaking out.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. It's crazy how it's just, sorry. Yeah, I was just saying it's crazy how it's just like you grow up and you start loving like death metal, like I said, and you just become tunnel vision. And then it's like when you grow into more music and then you realize bands that you love like Dimmu Borgir were influenced by bands like Kiss, and you kind of go, what? And then you kind of go, well, actually, now that I listen to it and know that, I can actually hear where that influence comes from. So it's kind of like you grow to admire it. And then, of course, now I photographed Kiss last year, so I also have a new admiration for that too. So
yeah, and for people that are watching us right now on the stream, we are going to be showing a slideshow in a few minutes of some of Char's work. So you get a chance to see some of the things he's done, both concerts and non-concerts. So just letting people know that keep tuning in, that you'll get a chance to see the things that we're talking about. But that brings me up to the point of, so when did your interest in photography / concert photography start, and what were those early years like?
Photography in general, same thing. It started right when my last year of high school. Like I say, I was about 17. I ended up taking photography as an extra class. I wasn't really 100% sure on it, but I was like, well, I need an extra class for credits, and I wanted it to be an art class, so that's what I took. I really loved it because it was with the old film camera, so it was even more unique and cool to be like, oh wow, to watch your photo develop and go through all the processes of it. And I did really well in the class, actually. I got like 110%. I ended up exceeding 100%. They had an extra question on the test that gave you that extra 10%. But my teacher at the time, unfortunately, was not very supportive of being in the arts as a career or a choice to go towards. And I don't want to say it was out of spite, but it definitely helped fuel some sort of love for it. She told me not to do it. So as any teenager, they rebel and do what they're not told not to do. But then down the road, it kind of ties into the sense that the reason of concert photography is I was very, very stage shy. My brother taught me the bass and he wanted me to be in his band. We went to have a gig. I had too much stage fright. I wanted nothing to do with it. I knew my notes were like note for note. I could have performed it as long as I would have like stood behind the curtain, which is I think what ended up happening. I don't really 100% remember anymore, but because I was again 17 years old. But then I decided, I'm like, well, now I have to find another avenue that I want to be involved in metal without being on the stage, because I don't have what it takes. And found out through just like being in my photography class, it kind of almost pushed me to go, well, I liked photography. I wonder if I can start looking into ways to bring that into my life while being involved in metal. And then I had friends like my brother said, sure, come shoot our show then, come practice on us. And a couple years of that went through, and that was in 2005, 2006. So by the time Nurgle came to me, it was 4 years had passed when he said, here's your photo pass. And all I shot was local shows here in Abbotsford or Vancouver or all over the place. And it was like, oh, okay. And then now here I am doing it for the big ones, which is way more fun and way easier than those little clubs ever were.
Well, and I think, and you know this, and I know this, and any other photographers out there watching this, is that, yeah, I mean, everyone starts with, it's usually local bands that are friends of yours that and say, hey, I come shoot this, because you have to try to figure out how to do it. And then once you start getting something that's a portfolio or an online portfolio these days, then people start looking at what you do and say, okay, then you can build off of that. I don't know if it's the same for you, but since I'm fairly new comparatively, it seems like a lot of the newer folks that have talked to me about this, they think they can just kind of jump into it and like, hey, how do you get a photo pass for, someone who, well, maybe it's Behemoth, it's like, well, right. What else have you shot? What have you done?
You kind of have to have some form of background. And nowadays, because so many people use phones, the photography industry has gotten a lot more tough to give out passes. So I kind of like it in some ways, because then it really controls who truly should be there. People who really want to be there, who truly need to be there for their music outlet, whatever, will push and push and push to get the accreditation because they know it's worth covering. Some Joe Blow off the street Joe is going, I have an iPad, or, oh, okay. It'll rule them out really quick, right? But yeah, the iPad just reminds me of Barge to Hell cruise and the guy with his iPad filming in front of me, and I was just like, come on. Just a flashback moment. I haven't experienced that personally. I've only seen it from other, someone like with a phone videoing someone with an iPad or whatever. Yeah, exactly. You're like, okay, the bigger one's being filmed by the smaller one, and then the photographer usually takes a picture of everyone doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I see somebody in the chat was asking, what's your favorite band?
Wow, that's a hard one. Behemoth has been one of my favorites for many, many years, but you know what? It started as my favorite, but now because my musical taste has grown so much over the years, it's kind of a combination between Croc, Anger, and Powerwolf. Just recently, I've really gotten hooked on them. But Behemoth is still one of my top for sure. They still fall. Those three probably fall very close to number one, but Behemoth will always slide just above to make it number one.
And that makes sense for sure, based on what you just talked about during this interview. And I know something that I wanted to also ask you was that particularly, well, maybe I don't know if it's particularly because of metal being the genre that it is, or maybe just in general with concert photography. Have you run into any kind of issues being female in this industry, either pro or con?
Pro, a lot of people, at least in the industry, like fellow photographers don't seem to treat you different being a female in this industry, at least not in my experience, because I definitely feel being a minority in the beginning. The last couple of years, I've definitely noticed more female photographers getting into the photo pits and putting themselves out there, which is great. 5 years ago, that definitely wasn't the case. I remember being at Iron Maiden's photo pit. I was the only woman in that photo pit, and it was definitely very weird. Yes, there was only 5 of us, but you still figure, seriously, there's only me. Like, and same with like going to shows of Behemoth early on when I shot Behemoth. It used to be only me. I was the only girl in that pit. There'd be like 7 or 8 other guys in there, and I'd still be the only girl. And that was probably changed in about 2016, 17 when I shot them around that time. And it was like, oh, wow, I'm the only girl. In a negative sense, it's very hard to get touring photographer gig. I find that's very challenging in this industry because a lot of the bands are male orientated. So unfortunately, not to put down girlfriends or wives in these scenarios, but a lot of them don't like the idea of a woman touring with the band. They worry that, oh, you might try and seduce our husband, or you might try and seduce our boyfriend. And that's 99% of the case. Never the case. But you know what? There are some people out there that may take advantage, which is a shame. Shame on them. But yeah, it is very hard as a touring photographer. There's a few bands that I know I probably could weasel into that position with, but I just don't push the button because it's like, well, you don't know what the wives or friends or close friends or anything are like at home. So it's like, maybe not. Okay. It's a lot easier to be a photographer, and because I did it once with Behemoth where I did 7 shows when Nurgle first came back from having leukemia. I did 7 shows, and you definitely see the variety of fans that you go, okay, I can kind of see why they're a little on edge having a female person on tour, because a lot of the fans on these tours are just so erratic that they worry that that's the type of person that goes on tour with them. And it's the groupie fans, whereas the person working isn't in that way, but they don't know that. So I can understand from both points, but it's just a shame trying to get a working gig as like someone like Ross Halfin, or, you know, like all these well-known ones that have been doing it for years for big name bands. For a woman, it's a lot harder, unfortunately. Yeah.
That's interesting. You brought up some really interesting points, and I want to talk about some of those things. But before we do, I want to show that slideshow that you put together. So if the folks down in LA could run the slideshow of Char's work, that would be awesome right now. And we'll kind of go from there. Let's see if this is... that was Char's slideshow, and as you can see, she's photographed some amazing artists, and I'm completely just bowled over by her work and herself as a person when I got a chance to meet her in the photo pits. So one thing that I was going to ask you when it comes to the work, we were talking during your slideshow that you had a chance to shoot Metallica, and you didn't have a contract, and there's some other things, and I've kind of had things not on that level, but on some other levels where some bands, for whatever reason, maybe if they know you or you've already shot them, then they'll go, oh yeah, no problem, we'll put you on the list. And then other times you hear like a neighboring photographer, they'll message me and say, Mark, did you have to fill out that rights grab kind of a thing, or depending on the contract? And I'm like, no. and I don't know. No. And I don't know what to say to them. So I think it just kind of, is it luck of the draw, or what happens with those kind of situations? Because you've probably been in them too.
You know what? It's funny. Like, with my opinion on the contracts, it depends how stickler the band really is. It's 90% of the time, it's really just they're protecting their own rights, which I understand. A photographer who takes one of a kind shot can make oodles of money if they just keep selling it to all these different publications, and the band loses money if they don't get some sort of say in it. However, it's like I've never been one to turn away a contract. I think usually if I find out the band itself, like from previous dates of the tour, that they're like Foo Fighters was at one point, I know that someone did mention to me that their contract was so hard, and it was just like, what's the point? You might as well just sell your soul, kind of. Like, okay, you no longer own anything. And I know I thought a year or two later they changed it, and it's more photographers once again started going into the pit again, because they're like, oh, I don't have to sell my soul anymore. I can just go in and take pictures, and they're protecting their own rights, which is totally fine. But no, it's everybody's personal opinion when it comes to those contracts. It is kind of luck of the draw that, yeah, you're like, sometimes I've never turned one away, but it's very, very, some people have, or sometimes they cross something out on the contract and sign it, and I'm like, I don't think you can just cross it out and and then sign it. I'm pretty sure it doesn't make it void, that you can now sell them. I think you still have to go by the contract you just signed. But yeah, no, it's contracts are interesting. I'm pro and con at the same time.
Yeah, I'm kind of like you, and I've only learned from seeing what other photographers that are much, much further up the rung than I am, what they do. So I'll see things online, and they'll be telling me, oh yeah, so-and-so's tour is up, who's been shooting the first couple of dates, and you'll kind of see, was there a contract? Was it, reasonable? Was it not? And that for me early on, I didn't even know those things existed. I didn't know how that worked. So then I can't remember the first show I had where there was a release that was sent to me ahead of time, but I think it was something fairly reasonable. But I have seen some that were like, yeah, selling your soul. I'm like, what's the point? What's the point of going then? I mean, I might as well I just want to be a fan that's pay for a ticket or whatever, because I have no right over any of this stuff, and I'm not just going to give away my work. Yeah. So there's got to be some sort of balance, with it.
Right. And it's the same with when they make you shoot from soundboard. Sometimes you kind of go, what's the point? I might as well, like some of these bands, they have so much stuff going on. You're better paying that $200 to be the front row seat and just take your little point and shoot and get way better shots than me way back at the back of the room. Like, it's just ridiculous sometimes. Like when they're older, I kind of get it, because they're like, well, I don't want to see the wrinkles. I want to look good from a distance. But when certain bands, like the younger ones, do it, you're like, why? You're like in your 30s. You're not all wrinkly yet, unless you have like a bad accident or something. I don't know, but still, it's like that to me is the frustrating part, when contracts say you have to shoot from the back. That's the really big con that I find is irritating, because you're like, all my shots look like the same angle. Like 20 photographers could stand there. We all have the same shot because we're all standing at the exact same spot. No one has any artistic view or creativity when you're all standing at the same spot. It's kind of irritating, in my opinion, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm actually one of these people that, and not that I have tons of soundboard experience, because I don't, but typically if I see that's what is required, then I really have to think twice about, do I really want to shoot from back there, knowing that's what the gig is. And there's all these things I've been learning, as time has been going on. And before we run out of time, speaking of that, we've got about 2 minutes. I want to ask you, because I know we have some photographers in the chat and other people that are watching this live right now and down the road as well. What kind of advice would you give for someone starting off, trying to get into just the concert photography and media work, period, not just metal stuff, but just in general?
In generally speaking, just put yourself out there. Reach out to people that are already in this industry. Reach out to photographers like you mentioned earlier, Mike Savoya. He's a great guy, super friendly, easy to talk to. Someone like myself, I'm always happy to help if you're new and learning. The biggest thing is to just get out there and practice, especially with low lit shows if metal is your area of expertise like myself. But any music in general, it really is practice, because that money shot will make the difference. It's just putting yourself out there. Reaching out to fellow photographers in forums, web chats, or watching videos like this and realizing, hey, another photographer has been doing it too. Just reach out and put yourself out there. That's the biggest thing I can suggest, for sure.
Okay, no, it's really good advice, and you're right. I mean, I've been really lucky that when I've asked questions of a lot of the veterans, that they've been super open about things. There's no secrets. It's just like, hey, this is what I did, or here's what I suggest, or here's what I've done in the past, or here's the mistake I made, and don't make that mistake, Mark. That kind of thing. It's been really really good. So, Char, it was awesome talking to you for the last half hour and getting to know you better, and then for people out there to get a chance to see your work. So, Char
My
Tupper,
pleasure.
Yes, Metal Titans. You can follow them on all the social media platforms. And if you've seen any of my own posts, and I've tagged them and Char in those, so you can find her and get things going. So stay safe up there, up north of me, and hopefully I'll see you sooner than later.
Thank you. You too, Mark. Thanks again.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.